Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to The Curious Case. It's always lovely having you here, our little corner of mysteries and midnight tea. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I always enjoy reading your messages. Don't forget to subscribe. New stories arrive every evening. Now, let's step into our quiet village of secrets. Something is waiting beyond the light. The morning light was soft, pale, and undecided. Mist clung to the hedges. A kettle hummed somewhere in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. The world was quiet, too quiet as if the village itself was still half dreaming. Miss Marple sat by her window, shawl wrapped tight, watching the garden breathe out the last curls of fog. Her tea steamed gently, a thin ribbon of warmth against the chill air. A cat stretched on the wall outside, tail flicking once, twice, before settling again. The smell of toast drifted faintly from a neighbor's kitchen. It was one of those mornings that felt safe, predictable, kind. The kind of morning where nothing ever happens until something does. From the vicarage lane came the soft creak of a bicycle wheel. Old Mrs. Bantry's milkman, perhaps, or someone new. Miss Marple tilted her head, listening. But the sound faded, swallowed by the hush of the mist. She turned back to her knitting, her fingers moving in the calm rhythm of habit. 2 stitches. Pause. 2 more. The pattern of an ordinary day. Yet beneath it, something in her chest stirred a small, uninvited awareness, as if the morning were holding its breath. Across the street, the baker's sign swayed gently in the wind. The bell above his door chimed once, though no one entered. A cat darted under the bench outside. The sound of its paws on the cobblestone seemed louder than it should have been. Miss Marple glanced up again. Her eyes, still sharp despite the years, followed the mist as it thinned along the hedge. The village rooftops emerged, one by one familiar, beloved. Each window lit in turn, each door open to another routine. And yet, today, she felt it. That small tremor beneath the calm. Something unseen pressing gently against the edge of peace. She rose, poured the last of her tea, and let the cup rest on the saucer. The sound was delicate, a porcelain sigh. Her gaze drifted toward the gate, half shrouded in fog. It stood open by an inch. She didn't remember leaving it so. For a moment, she considered going out to close it, but something instinct, perhaps, kept her still. The kettle clicked in the next room. The clock ticked, and from far away, a single bell rang from the church tower. Then, silence. A pause in the birdsong. The cat froze. Even the mist seemed to listen. Miss Marple's hand hovered above her knitting needles. Her eyes lingered on the gate, unmoving. Something unspoken lingered there like a thought that refused to leave. A morning so calm, it almost felt rehearsed. The sound came softly at first, a faint knock. Then silence. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting, the yarn still looped around her fingers. The morning light was a pale gold now, slipping across the windowsill like a polite visitor of its own. She waited, listening. Nothing. Then it came again, 3 slow taps against the door, measured, too careful to belong to a tradesman. She rose, smoothing her shawl, the room quiet except for the ticking clock on the mantel. Outside, the frost still clung to the garden path, and the air held that peculiar stillness before something changes. She opened the door just enough to see the outline of a man, hat in hand, breath rising like smoke. "Forgive the intrusion, madam," he said. His voice was courteous, yet uneasy, as if he had rehearsed the words. "I was told Miss Marple was staying here." She nodded once. "That would be me," she said gently. "Do come in. You look half frozen." He stepped over the threshold, his boots leaving faint prints of frost on the mat. He removed his hat. His fingers trembled not from cold, she thought, but from something else. He smiled, though his eyes did not. "I won't stay long," he said. "I've a message, of some importance." He handed her a small envelope, edges damp from the morning air. No seal, no return name. Just her own written neatly in blue ink. She studied it without opening it. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. Inside, a faint scent of ink and old paper lingered. Something about it felt personal, old-fashioned, perhaps almost too polite for the time we lived in. She looked up again. "Who gave you this?" The man hesitated. "A woman," he said after a pause. "She didn't give her name." His gaze flickered toward the lane. "She said you'd understand." Miss Marple's eyes softened. A simple line, yet heavy with meaning. She thanked him, and he left quickly, hat pressed low, boots crunching down the path until they disappeared behind the hedge. For a long moment, she stood by the open door. The mist had thickened again, curling along the ground like pale smoke. A robin hopped onto the gatepost, then stopped, head tilted, as if listening too. She closed the door quietly and returned to her chair. The envelope lay untouched beside the teapot. Steam curled upward, ghostly and slow. She did not open it. Not yet. Something unspoken lingered in the air, faint as perfume, sharp as intuition. Her fingers rested on the envelope's edge. The house felt smaller now, the clock louder, and in that stillness, a thought whispered to her. She felt something was off. The breakfast room was bright but gentle, washed in the pale gold of an English morning. Steam curled from the teapot, soft and constant, like a sigh that refused to end. Outside, the frost still glittered on the hedges, but inside, warmth moved between the clink of cups and the low hum of voices. Miss Marple sat nearest the window, knitting resting quietly in her lap. Raymond West leaned back in his chair, still in his robe, with the satisfied air of a man who liked being comfortable. Across from him, his wife Celia was already dressed for the day, hair neat. Sleeves buttoned her efficiency, both admirable and faintly exhausting. At the end of the table, Mrs. Hargreaves, their neighbour, stirred her sugar with the slow deliberation of someone accustomed to being overheard. The conversation was polite, practiced, the kind that pretends to fill silence but never really does. Celia asked after the vicar's garden. Raymond replied with half a smile. Mrs. Hargreaves murmured something about the frost ruining the roses, though her tone suggested she meant something else entirely. Then the maid entered, quiet, respectful, carrying a small silver tray. On it lay the morning's letters and one curious thing that caught the light. A key. Old, brass, slightly tarnished. It had been found, she said, near the front gate. No one claimed it. Miss Marple glanced at it, the way one notices a familiar face, but cannot recall where from. Celia lifted her brows. Strange, she said softly. We don't lock that gate anymore. Mrs. Hargreaves gave a little laugh. Oh, my dear, old keys have stories of their own. Best not to open them. Her words hung oddly in the air, part jest, part warning. Even Raymond looked up. Or perhaps, he said, someone lost it on purpose. Miss Marple smiled faintly, though her eyes never left the tray. Sometimes, she said, what's lost simply wishes to be found again. The maid hesitated, unsure whether to leave the key or take it away. Put it by the clock, Celia said briskly. Someone will remember it later. The clock ticked once, twice. Then silence. Even the teapot seemed to pause mid-breath. Raymond reached for the paper. The village fair is this weekend, he said. Perhaps this mysterious key belongs to one of the stalls. There's always some nonsense lying about. Mrs. Hargreaves chuckled politely, but Celia didn't smile. I don't think so, she said. Her eyes lingered on the brass glint near the clock. It looks older than that. Miss Marple folded her hands together. Thoughtful. Age and value, she murmured, don't always travel together. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of the wind slipping beneath the window pane. Then Raymond laughed, lightly, almost forced. Well, whatever it opens, I'm certain it's not worth our morning tea. The others smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. Something unspoken lingered, faint, uneasy, but real. Even the sunlight seemed to dim a little, as if listening. And when Mrs. Hargreaves finally said, perhaps it opens something best left closed, no one laughed after that remark. The afternoon light had softened to amber, spilling through lace curtains and pooling across the table like quiet gold. Miss Marple sat by the window, her teacup half empty, the steam curling lazily in the still air. The brass key still rested near the clock, untouched, catching the light every now and then like an eye that refused to close. Celia's voice broke the hush. "There's a luncheon tomorrow," she said, glancing toward her aunt. "At the Greenways estate. The Grahams are hosting. You remember Leo Graham, don't you? Doctor's son. He's back from abroad." Miss Marple looked up slowly. Her smile was gentle. "Yes, dear. I remember him quite well. Always had ink on his fingers and questions on his tongue." Raymond folded his newspaper with a sigh. "I didn't know they were entertaining already. His sister only just returned from London, didn't she?" He reached for his tea, pretending indifference, though his tone carried curiosity. Celia nodded. Mary said, "It's informal. Just family and a few neighbours. But she specifically asked for you, Aunt Jane." She paused. "Rather urgently, in fact." Miss Marple blinked. "Urgently?" she repeated softly. The words settled between them like dust on polished silver. Celia hurried to fill the silence. "Oh, nothing dramatic, I'm sure. She probably wants to thank you for helping with her mother years ago." Her tone was bright. Too bright. Mrs. Hargreaves, still nursing her tea, smiled faintly. "The Grahams don't invite without reason," she murmured. Then she added almost kindly, "Perhaps she needs advice, or comfort, or confession." The room grew still again. A bird fluttered against the window pane, startled by its own reflection. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the key by the clock, then drifted back to her cup. "Well," she said finally, "one never refuses a Graham invitation. It would seem rude." Her voice was calm, yet thoughtful, as if she were reasoning with something unseen. Celia clapped her hands lightly. "Splendid. I'll tell Mary you'll come. It's tomorrow at noon. You'll enjoy the change." Raymond smiled, half amused. "Yes, Aunt Jane, a little outing might do you good. Fresh faces, polite gossip your natural hunting ground." He meant it fondly, though his tone carried that teasing affection that always drew a small smile from her. Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. Her eyes followed the last of the tea steam rising into the sunlight, disappearing before it reached the curtain. She felt that quiet shift in the air again, that unseen tremor that sometimes visited her before things began. The world outside looked peaceful. A frost-kissed calm stretched over the hedges, but peace, she knew, was rarely still beneath the surface. Celia rose, humming softly, already thinking about dresses and gloves. Raymond reopened his paper, and Miss Marple, left with her thoughts, touched the key once, before setting it aside. Something unspoken lingered between her and the fading light. She agreed to go, though something in her said not to. The morning began in pale silver light, the kind that hides the color from everything. Frost clung to the hedges, and a low mist drifted over the fields. The car engine murmured softly as Raymond turned onto the country road, gloved hands steady on the wheel. Miss Marple sat beside him, small and neat, her shawl folded carefully over her knees. Celia was in the back, humming to herself as she checked her gloves for the third time. No one spoke much at first. Only the tires whispered over the frozen ground. "It's strange," Celia said finally, "how winter mornings look so beautiful and so lonely at once." Raymond smiled faintly. "You've been reading too many of my stories again." But Miss Marple only nodded. "Loneliness often looks lovely," she said softly. "It's how it hides best." They passed the village square. The baker's shop still shuttered, the post office lamp dim. A dog barked once in the distance, then nothing. The world seemed to hold its breath. Celia leaned forward slightly. "I can't quite remember when I last saw Mary Graham. Wasn't she the quiet one?" Miss Marple's eyes followed the fog curling along the hedgerows. "Yes," she murmured. "Quiet, but not unobservant. A mind like a lake. Still, yet full of things unseen." Raymond chuckled under his breath. "Sounds like someone else I know." Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes didn't leave the mist. The road narrowed, winding between old trees whose bare branches looked like outstretched hands. The fog thickened there, grey and heavy, blurring the line between road and sky. They slowed as a figure appeared ahead, a postman perhaps, or just a shadow moving through the mist. By the time they reached the bend, he was gone. Only the faint scent of smoke lingered in the air. Celia frowned. Slightly. Odd. I could have sworn I saw someone. Raymond shrugged. This weather plays tricks. Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her shawl. She didn't reply, but she glanced once at the small brass key in her handbag, now cool against her palm. She hadn't meant to bring it, and yet she had. The car climbed the hill, engine humming steadily. The mist began to thin just enough for outlines to appear, trees, stone walls, and the faint suggestion of rooftops beyond. Celia leaned closer to the window. "Oh, look," she said. "I think that's Greenways ahead." The clouds shifted, and light broke through for a moment, a pale golden blade cutting through grey. The house revealed itself slowly, like something being remembered. Tall chimneys, ivy still clinging to the walls, windows dark, reflective, unreadable. Raymond slowed the car, gaze fixed forward. "Strange," he murmured. "I don't remember it feeling so quiet." Miss Marple looked at the house, its outline sharp against the thinning fog. She didn't answer. Her expression softened, then stilled, as if listening to something only she could hear. The mist curled once more around the stone gateposts, wrapping the entrance in silver breath. And as the car rolled closer, she thought the house appeared through the mist, waiting. The gravel crunched softly beneath the car's wheels as they entered the drive. Mist still clung to the hedges, curling around the gateposts like pale smoke. Then, as if on cue, the fog lifted and Greenways appeared. The house was grand, but not proud. Its stone facade wore the faint green of age, ivy trailing upward like delicate veins. Tall windows caught the weak sunlight and scattered it in dull reflections. A garden stretched before it, winter bare but perfectly arranged, every path swept, every bench placed with care. The symmetry was almost unnerving. Raymond parked the car near the steps. A footman appeared almost instantly, gloved hands folded, as though he had been waiting in silence all morning. "Good day, sir. Miss Marple," he said with a small bow. "Doctor and Miss Graham are expecting you." His tone was polished, but his eyes shifted once toward the upper windows before looking away. Celia adjusted her hat, glancing up. "Good heavens," she murmured. "It's larger than I remember." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Houses often grow with memory, my dear, especially the ones that hold it." The doors opened with a hollow sound, not a creak, but a sigh. Inside, warmth and candlelight mingled with the scent of beeswax and faint lilac. The entrance hall gleamed. Polished wood floors reflected the glow of an ornate chandelier, and portraits lined the walls' stern faces, painted eyes that seemed unwilling to look away. A woman descended the staircase, her gown a muted blue that caught the light like silk water. She was graceful, poised, yet the way her fingers clutched the rail betrayed tension. "Miss Marple," she said, smiling too quickly. "It's been years." "Indeed, Miss Graham," Miss Marple replied softly. "You've made the place quite beautiful." Mary Graham hesitated, then laughed lightly. "Father insisted it be perfect, even now." Her voice lingered strangely on that last word, and something in her eyes flickered a shadow that disappeared as quickly as it came. "Doctor." Leo Graham appeared behind her, taller, brisk, the kind of man who smiled with half his mouth. He shook hands warmly with Raymond, politely with Celia, and with a curious gentleness when it came to Miss Marple. "Aunt Jane," he said, using the childhood name he'd once given her. "I'm glad you came. It wouldn't have felt right without you." There was sincerity in his tone and weariness just beneath it. Miss Marple noticed. As she noticed the faint dust along the banister, the missing vase from the alcove, and a small patch on the rug where sunlight never seemed to reach. Every perfection, she thought, had a shadow attached. The group followed Mary toward the drawing room, their voices echoing softly in the high ceiling. A maid passed by, carrying a tray of flowers, white lilies. The fragrance was sweet, but behind it, faintly, she caught the dry scent of old smoke. Miss Marple slowed near the doorway, her gaze sweeping the immaculate hall once more. The polished silver, the amber light, the stillness that was too carefully arranged. It was beautiful, yes, almost too beautiful. And as the clock in the distance began to chime noon, Miss Marple thought, perfection, she thought, always hides a crack. The drawing-room at Greenways was warm, almost too warm, as if the fire had been built to keep guests from thinking of anything but comfort. The air carried the faint sweetness of roses, mixed with something sharper polish, or perhaps restraint. Miss Marple sat near the hearth, her hands folded neatly, watching the light shimmer across the silver tray on the table. Around her, polite conversation unfolded like a play everyone already knew. Celia complimented the lilies. Mary thanked her, her smile courteous but tired. Raymond leaned toward Dr. Leo, asking after his travels, and the two men spoke of Switzerland, of weather, of medicine, everything except what mattered. "You've done wonders here," Raymond said. "The place feels alive again." Leo's smile tightened. "Yes, we've tried." He stirred his tea absently. "The house prefers company. It dislikes silence." Miss Marple glanced at him then, not sharply but kindly, as if she'd caught the corner of a truth. "Some houses," she said, "hold memories better than people do." Leo looked up. "Memories can be merciful," he said softly, "or cruel." Across the room, Mary had joined Celia by the window. Outside, frost still glimmered across the lawn, and the bare trees made pale reflections in the glass. Mary's tone was light, her laughter polite, but her eyes kept drifting toward the garden path. Celia noticed. "Expecting someone?" she asked kindly. Mary shook her head. "No, just remembering." She smiled, but it was a fragile thing. There used to be roses all along that walk. Father planted them for Mother. He said they'd last forever. Her gaze softened. "Forever never lasts, does it?" Celia hesitated, unsure whether to comfort or agree. Miss Marple, hearing, looked toward them with quiet empathy, that instinct that sensed sorrow even when hidden behind grace. The maid entered with a new tray of scones, the silver shining under the amber light. She placed it carefully, then left without a word. Miss Marple noticed her hands tremble slightly as she passed. Perhaps nerves, perhaps something remembered. Raymond took another sip of tea and said, "So many familiar faces today. It's like time has politely forgotten to move." Mrs. Hargreaves, arriving late, gave a little laugh. "Time doesn't forget, dear boy. It only pretends." The words drew a stillness to the room, a quiet shift, like the sound of the fire dimming. Miss Marple looked from face to face, each polite smile, each unspoken thought behind it. Old neighbors, old ties, and perhaps old guilt. Mary turned back to the table, her eyes catching the brass key lying beside the sugar bowl, the same one found at Raymond's gate. Her hand froze. "How strange," she murmured. "I thought that was lost years ago." Leo looked up sharply. "Whose was it?" Mary hesitated, her voice low. "Father's. He said it belonged to the garden house, the one we never opened." The fire crackled softly. No one spoke. Miss Marple's gaze rested on the key, then on Mary's trembling hand. Something unspoken lingered in the still air, heavy, unseen, waiting, and then, quietly, almost reverently, a silence fell, the kind that remembers. The fire burned low, its glow spreading amber across the polished floor. Outside, the mist pressed softly against the windows, blurring the world beyond. Inside, teacups rested half full, and conversation had thinned to something quieter, the kind of silence that invites stories. It was Mrs. Hargreaves who spoke first. Her voice carried that measured tone of one who has told a tale before, not for drama but to keep memory alive. "I suppose," she began, stirring her tea, "you've all heard about the portrait in the West Hall." Mary looked up, startled. "The one of my mother?" Mrs. Hargreaves nodded slowly. "Yes, though it wasn't always in that hall." Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. The flames flickered against the brass grate, painting Mrs. Hargreaves's face in gold and shadow. She continued softly. "It used to hang above the piano room, years ago. When your father was alive. Her spoon paused. There was a night, one of those winter storms that rattled the house like bones. Everyone had gone to bed early, everyone except your father, and that young maid Ellen, I think her name was. Mary's expression tightened. I remember Ellen. She left suddenly, didn't she? Mrs. Hargreaves hesitated. So it was said. Her voice dropped. She was seen near midnight, standing before that portrait, candle in hand, talking as if someone were answering her. Celia shivered lightly, though the fire was warm. Raymond smiled faintly, trying to soften the chill. Talking to portraits, Mrs. Hargreaves. Surely the storm made her nervous. Mrs. Hargreaves looked toward the window, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Perhaps. But when the storm broke, the candle was found still burning right there on the floor. The portrait frame was cracked across the middle, and Ellen was gone. Leo frowned. Gone where? No one knew, Mrs. Hargreaves said simply. She wasn't in her room nor the servants' quarters. The next morning, the garden paths were covered in frost. There were footprints leading to the garden house, the one your father kept locked. Mary's hand found the arm of her chair. Her voice was soft, strained. I never knew that part. Mrs. Hargreaves nodded once. No one spoke of it again. But after that night, the portrait was moved. Your father said the light fell better in the West Hall. She sipped her tea. Yet I always thought he moved it so it couldn't. Watch the door. Miss Marple's knitting needles rested quietly in her lap. Her gaze had drifted toward the mantelpiece, where a small mirror reflected the firelight in trembling fragments. Reflections, she thought, never lie, they only wait to be noticed. The flames cracked once, startlingly loud. No one spoke for several moments. The room seemed to exhale all at once, as if remembering something it would rather forget. Mary's voice, when it came, was quiet but sure. Ellen wasn't the only one who disappeared that winter, she said. There was someone else. A man father dismissed the same week. Leo looked sharply at her, but she didn't continue. Instead, she rose and crossed to the mantel, her hand brushing the mirror's edge. The glass trembled faintly in its frame. Mrs. Hargreaves's eyes followed her. And that, she said softly, was the night someone never woke again. The fire had burned lower, its glow deepening to a quiet red. The storm outside had calmed, but the air inside the drawing room carried a different kind of weight. Teacups sat untouched now. Every voice was softer, as though the house itself had drawn nearer to listen. It was Raymond who broke the silence first. So, he said lightly, this Ellen girl vanished in a storm, and no one ever saw her again. He looked around the circle. His tone was casual, but the question hung like a thread waiting to be pulled. Mary Graham's fingers tightened around her teacup. No, she said. Not properly seen. There were rumors. Some said she wrote a letter. Others claimed she never left the grounds. She looked at her brother, but Leo's expression didn't change. Rumors, he said, stirring his tea slowly. They come free with every tragedy. Mrs. Hargreaves set her spoon down. And yet, she murmured, rumors usually begin somewhere. Her eyes glinted in the firelight. Didn't your father dismiss one of the gardeners that week? Leo's hand paused mid-motion. Yes, he said. Wilkins, a surly fellow, always muttering. He'd been stealing firewood, or so father said. Celia tilted her head. Was he ever questioned? Leo gave a short laugh. By whom? This was 20 years ago, Mrs. West. People disappear all the time. Servants, most of all. Miss Marple had been silent. Her knitting rested idle in her lap. Only her eyes moved, steady and kind, watching each speaker in turn. The firelight touched her spectacles, hiding her gaze for a heartbeat, then letting it return calm and knowing. Mary spoke again, more quietly now. Father said Ellen was simple-minded, that she imagined things. She hesitated. But she wasn't. She was shy, yes, but gentle. Once she found my mother's brooch in the snow and returned it before anyone noticed it gone. Her voice trembled slightly. She was good. A silence followed, the kind that turns air heavy. Raymond leaned forward. Then why did no one look for her? Mrs. Hargreaves answered before Leo could. Because the next morning the portrait was repaired, the key was gone, and the story was buried under respectability. The Grahams had no wish for scandal. She sipped her tea, eyes fixed on the fire. It's remarkable, isn't it? How quickly people forgive mystery when it's inconvenient. Leo frowned. That's unfair. Perhaps, she said. But unspoken things never stay silent forever. Miss Marple looked toward the brass key on the table. The faint light shimmered across it like breath. Something in its stillness seemed to pull the room taut again. She didn't speak yet. She only folded her hands and listened as the threads wound tighter. Mary glanced toward her, as if seeking reassurance. Miss Marple met her gaze, gentle, patient, yet filled with quiet certainty. Celia broke the silence next. So the portrait, the storm, the missing girl, the locked garden house. She looked from one face to another. Are we certain those aren't all the same story? No one answered. Even the clock hesitated before striking the next minute. The house seemed to breathe differently, then slower, cautious. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Her voice, when it came, was low, almost kind. Sometimes, she said, letting the words settle, the smallest question unlocks the largest lie. The storm outside had faded to drizzle, soft as breath against the windows. Inside, the drawing room had grown dim. The fire glowed lower, now red coals beneath slow-moving shadows. Miss Marple sat quite still, her knitting untouched beside her. The others had fallen quiet, each lost in a different thought. Her eyes moved gently from face to face. Raymond leaned back, arms folded, pretending ease. Celia stirred her tea, though it had long gone cold. Mary Graham sat near the piano, head bent, one gloved hand touching her cheek. And Leo had risen, pacing near the mantel, his reflection trembling in the small mirror above it. Every gesture told its own story. Small things, unimportant to most but not to her. The way Leo's jaw tightened when the word portrait was spoken. The way Mary's fingers brushed her mother's ring again and again, though she seemed unaware of it. Even the maid's earlier trembling hands. That had not gone unnoticed. Miss Marple's mind moved with quiet precision. Not rushing, not forcing, just connecting threads that waited patiently to be tied. She had seen families like this before. Old houses, old secrets folded neatly under civility. They always thought kindness could keep the truth from breathing. But truth, she knew, was patient too. It waited until the heart was tired of pretending. She looked toward the key lying on the tray, still and ordinary, yet somehow, the quiet center of it all, the shape of it stirred something in her memory. A pattern, a house in Devon, a key left on a mantel, a servant girl dismissed after supper, and a locked door no one ever opened again. Strange, isn't it, she said softly, how keys always turn up when they're least expected. Leo turned. His face was calm, but his voice carried a thin thread of tension. You think it means something? Oh, she said gently. Everything means something. The question is simply when we notice it. Celia gave a small laugh, trying to break the mood. You make it sound as if the key has a memory. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Perhaps it does. Some objects remember better than people. Her gaze returned to Leo. He'd stopped pacing now. The firelight flickered against his face, half warmth, half shadow. He looked suddenly older, the light showing what time usually hides. Weariness, regret, and fear, carefully hidden behind good manners. Miss Marple didn't move. She only watched, quiet and kind, the way one listens to the last note of a song before silence. Then, slowly, she lifted her teacup, though she did not drink. People, she murmured, are rather like houses. You can polish the windows all you like, but the dust still gathers where no one looks. No one replied. Even the fire seemed to hush, as if the house were holding its breath. Mary's hand fell from her cheek, and Leo turned away, toward the window. His reflection in the glass was pale, uncertain, almost transparent against the grey afternoon beyond. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him, gentle, unjudging, but sharp as glass beneath. She'd seen that same look before, once, before death. The fire had sunk low again. Only its glow remained, soft and amber, crawling along the edges of the room. Rain tapped lightly at the windows, now slow, steady, and thoughtful. The house felt smaller in that light, as if it too were listening. Miss Marple sat with her hands folded. She had said little since her last remark. The others seemed grateful for her silence, though they could not name why. Words had become delicate things. Everyone carried weight now. Leo stood by the mantel, his back turned to the room. The clock beside him ticked softly, marking the seconds with painful civility. He spoke without looking at anyone. Ellen was young. Too young to understand what admiration can become when it's misplaced. He paused. And my father was not the sort of man who resisted admiration. Celia's breath caught softly, but she said nothing. Mary's teacup trembled slightly as she set it down. No one interrupted. Miss Marple only looked toward the mirror above the mantel, watching Leo's reflection instead of his face. He continued quietly, almost as though speaking to himself. She would linger by the piano, bring flowers to the hall. Little things, harmless really, until she began writing him notes. He drew in a breath. She believed he loved her. Mrs. Hargreaves stirred, but Miss Marple lifted a hand, just enough to keep her still. Her eyes softened, the kind of softness that makes truth easier to touch. "Did your father tell her otherwise?" she asked gently. Leo's jaw tightened. He dismissed her, immediately, told Mother it was nothing. But after that night, after she disappeared, he turned then, his voice almost a whisper. Mother stopped playing the piano altogether. The fire cracked, sending a thin ribbon of smoke upward. It curled, pale and weightless, like a memory escaping from its cage. Mary spoke at last, her voice trembling at the edges. "She found the letter, didn't she? That's why she went to the garden house that night." Leo looked at her, startled, then slowly nodded. "Perhaps." Miss Marple's eyes lowered to the brass key on the table. It gleamed faintly, catching the flicker of the flame. "That door," she said softly, "was never locked from inside, was it?" Leo said nothing. Silence answered in his place. The rain thickened. Each drop against the glass sounded like a slow heartbeat. Mary rose, pacing once, her hand brushing the wall as if for balance. She loved him, she said. Poor Ellen. She loved him so much she couldn't bear being forgotten. Miss Marple looked up. "Love, when unanswered," she said, "has a way of turning into something else. A hunger, a kind of quiet cruelty, often toward oneself." Celia's eyes glistened. "It's dreadful, isn't it, to love that way?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. Dreadful and deeply human. For a moment, no one spoke. The house seemed to sigh around them, old timbers shifting, memories resettling into silence. The portrait above the piano stared down, serene, untouched. Only the mirror reflected movement, the faint shimmer of firelight, the trace of tears, the ghost of something lost long ago. Miss Marple reached for her tea. The steam curled gently upward, disappearing into the air before it could cool. Her voice came softer than before, almost like thought itself. "Love," she murmured, "is the finest disguise of all." The clock struck 4. Its sound rolled through the drawing room, soft, hollow, precise. Rain tapped against the glass, steady as a memory that refused to fade. No one spoke. The quiet between them had deepened, into something fragile, like glass that might break under breath. Then Mary moved, slowly, deliberately. She rose from her chair and crossed to the small desk near the window. The drawer opened with a hesitant click. From within she drew a folded piece of paper, yellowed and thin, the edges soft with age. She turned it in her hands a moment before speaking. "I wasn't sure I still had this," she said quietly. "It was tucked inside one of Mother's hymn books. I found it last spring." Leo looked up sharply. His voice was calm, but his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. "What is it?" Mary's eyes met his. "Her handwriting," she said. "Mother's, but it's addressed to Father, dated the night Ellen disappeared." Celia leaned forward slightly. Her voice was soft, careful. "Have you read it?" Mary hesitated. then nodded. Yes, and I shouldn't have. But once you've read something like this, you can't unread it. She unfolded the letter slowly. The paper made a sound like a sigh. Miss Marple watched quietly. The firelight flickered across Mary's face, catching the tremor of her hands. The ink had faded, but the words still held shape, the stubborn endurance of truth. Mary began to read, her voice low, each word trembling between composure and grief. My dearest, I know now. I saw the girl in the garden. I saw how she looked at you, and how you did not look away. I cannot blame her, but I cannot forgive you either. When morning comes, I shall speak to her myself. I will ask her to leave. Not in anger, but mercy. For both our sakes. The room seemed to shrink around the sound. Only the rain moved. Only the clock ticked on, unwilling to stop. Mary's hand lowered the paper. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She never spoke to her, she whispered. She never had the chance. Ellen vanished before morning. Leo rose slowly, his face pale. He reached for the letter, but Mary held it back. Her voice was gentle yet steady. Do you see now? She knew. She understood everything, even your silence. Miss Marple's gaze dropped to the letter. The candle beside it flickered once, caught by a draught. The flame danced, uncertain, as though it too struggled to stay upright under the weight of what had been read. Celia whispered. Perhaps she tried to stop her. Maybe she went after her that night. No one answered. The possibility lingered in the air, soft, sorrowful, half-believed. Miss Marple leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. There was empathy there, and something else, recognition perhaps. She had seen too many letters like this, too many hearts that mistook silence for safety. Mary set the paper on the table beside the brass key. For a moment, the two objects seemed to belong together, one written, one locked. Two halves of the same truth. The paper trembled in the faint draught, edges curling toward the flame, and with it, the lie. The rain had stopped. Only the steady drip from the roof broke the silence. Inside, the air had grown heavier, the kind of stillness that comes when something long hidden stands just behind words. The letter lay on the table beside the brass key. Its edges curled slightly, as though resisting the light. No one moved for a long moment. Then Leo spoke, very quietly. I burned her letters, he said. His voice was flat at first, the tone of someone speaking from memory, not feeling. She left 3 of them in Father's study, foolish things, full of longing. He drew a slow breath. Father asked me to destroy them. So I did. Mary turned to him, her expression unreadable. You helped him hide it? Leo shook his head faintly. No, I helped him forget. Miss Marple looked at him with that calm gentleness that saw everything. Sometimes forgetting, she said softly, is only another way of keeping. He smiled then, the kind of smile that has no warmth. Perhaps. But I was young. I thought loyalty meant silence. He moved closer to the fire, his reflection trembling in the mirror above the mantel. It wasn't silence that killed her, though. It was shame. Celia whispered. You mean Ellen? Leo nodded. She came to me that night. She wanted to speak to Father, but he refused her. She said she couldn't live with the whispers anymore. She begged me to listen. He paused. I told her to go, to leave before she ruined what was left of us. His voice broke then only slightly, but the room caught it, held it. He turned away, his shoulders stiff. When I saw the key was missing the next morning, I knew where she'd gone. The garden house, Father's private room. I thought she'd gone there to plead again. I thought she'd wait for him. But when we opened the door, he stopped. No one asked him to continue. Mary closed her eyes. Her hand reached for the letter again, fingertips trembling. She wasn't trying to ruin us, she said quietly. She wanted to be seen, that's all. Miss Marple rose slowly from her chair. The firelight touched the edge of her shawl, turning it gold. Her eyes, clear and kind, found Leo's. People rarely mean harm, she said. They mean love. Only, they don't always know what to do with it once it hurts. Leo looked at her then, truly looked, and whatever composure he had kept began to crumble. His breath shook. He pressed a hand to his face. "I never told anyone," he said. "I thought the silence would fade with time, but it didn't." Miss Marple stepped closer. Her voice lowered, soft as prayer. "Silence," she said, "is the longest echo there is." The fire gave a last crackle, and the clock began to chime again, faint, distant, like a heartbeat too tired to continue. Mary stood. Her hand rested on her brother's arm. Neither spoke. Only the sound of their breathing filled the space between them, uneven, human, forgiving. Miss Marple looked down at the letter once more. The ink shimmered faintly under the amber light, words blurred by time and tears. She reached out, folded it carefully, and placed it beside the key. Her eyes softened. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Some truths," she said, "arrive too late to save anyone." The room was very still, not the polite quiet of conversation ending, but the kind that follows a wound. Even the fire seemed to lower its voice. Only the faint hiss of rain against the chimney filled the silence. Leo stood motionless by the hearth. Mary sat, her eyes lowered, her hands resting in her lap, pale against the dark fabric of her dress. Celia and Raymond exchanged a glance, the kind born from helpless sympathy. There was nothing more to ask, nothing more to explain. Miss Marple remained where she was, her shawl drawn loosely about her shoulders. Her gaze was calm, almost tender. She had heard so many confessions in her life, each different, each the same. Always, in the end, it came back to love, or the absence of it. No one spoke for several minutes. The house itself seemed to breathe around them, old timbers creaking softly, settling into stillness. Somewhere down the hall a clock began to tick again, faint but certain, as if reminding them that time, indifferent as ever, would go on. Mary was the first to move. She reached for the folded letter on the table, tracing the crease down its center. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think Mother forgave him," she said. "She must have. Otherwise she would never have hidden this." Leo's reply was quiet, flat, as if the words weighed too much to carry. "She forgave everyone, Mary. Everyone but herself." The sentence hung there, long enough to draw breath from the room. Celia reached out, touching Mary's arm. "Perhaps forgiveness isn't about who deserves it," she said softly. "Perhaps it's about who needs it most." Miss Marple turned toward the window. The glass was fogged, catching the glow of the fire in a faint reflection. Beyond it, the garden blurred into shadow. Rain had begun to fall again, slow, and even the kind of rain that sounds like memory. She thought of the girl, Ellen, of her last walk through that garden, of how easily one life can vanish into silence when no one listens closely enough. And she thought of the Grahams, both gone and living, bound by the same quiet ache, circling one another like ghosts still learning to speak. She stepped closer to the table and gently picked up the brass key. Its metal was cool against her palm, worn smooth by years of waiting. A simple object, and yet how much sorrow it had kept. She turned it once between her fingers, then set it back beside the letter. "There's no need to open locked doors anymore," she said softly. "Sometimes it's enough to know what was behind them." Leo looked at her then, his face pale, his eyes tired but clear. "I thought truth would set things right," he said. "But it hasn't. It only hurts differently." Miss Marple gave a small, sad smile. "Truth doesn't mend, Mr. Graham. It reminds. We only begin to heal when we stop hiding from what we already know." For a long moment, no one replied. The fire sighed. Rain whispered down the glass. And somewhere outside, a branch tapped against the wall patient, persistent. Mary rose, folding the letter once more. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though each gesture meant farewell. "I'll keep it," she said quietly, "not to protect Father's memory, but to remember Mother's grace." Miss Marple nodded. Her expression softened, almost affectionate. "That would please her," she said. She believed kindness could outlast pain, and perhaps it can. Celia drew a deep breath. The air smelled of wood smoke and rain-soaked lilac. The storm outside gathered its rhythm again, filling the house with its steady music. No thunder now, no wind, just rain endless, soft, forgiving. Raymond rose and moved toward the window. He pulled the curtain back slightly, watching the drops streak down the glass. "It's strange," he said, "how peaceful everything looks now." Miss Marple followed his gaze. The garden shimmered faintly beneath the downpour, its path silvered by water, its silence clean again. "Peace," she murmured, "has a way of returning, even where sorrow has lived." Mary placed the letter beside the key once more. The paper fluttered with the breath of the fire, then settled still, quiet, whole. Leo's hand brushed it as he passed, his voice little more than thought. "I hope she rests now." Miss Marple looked toward him, her eyes soft and knowing. "She will," she said, "so long as you let her." For a while no one moved. The house seemed to sigh not from grief now, but from release, the kind that follows understanding. The clock struck once, a slow, single note, echoing through wood and stone. And outside, beyond the window, the rain began soft, endless, forgiving. The lamps were lit early, turning the room to amber hush. Candles steadied the light, and the fire sighed in low breaths. Rain softened to mist against the panes, a veil upon the garden. Greenways felt smaller now, kinder, almost contrite. Celia reached for the teapot. Her hand was steady again. Steam rose, graceful and white, curling like ribboned breath. She poured for Mary first, then for Leo, then for Miss Marple, who thanked her with a small nod. The china clinked softly. Saucers met the tablecloth like gentle punctuation. No one hurried the moment. It felt right to linger. Miss Marple wrapped her hands around the cup's warmth. The scent was faintly floral, comforting, patient. Outside, the hedges carried glassy beads of water. Frost-kissed edges softened under the evening drizzle. The garden's hard lines blurred. So did the day. Raymond drew the curtains halfway, leaving a sliver of grey sky. In that slice, the last light faded without argument. He returned to his seat and said nothing. Silence needed room. They gave it. Mary lifted her cup, then set it down again. Her throat worked around unshed words. "I thought forgiveness would feel louder," she said softly. "It doesn't." Miss Marple smiled. "Mercy rarely raises its voice," she answered. Leo sat near the hearth, hands folded as if in prayer. The fire's glow painted his face in forgiving colors. Not absolution. Not yet. But the first breath after sorrow. Celia offered sugar. Mary shook her head. Leo took one cube, then changed his mind. He let it rest upon the plate, gleaming like a small frost. The choice felt like a beginning. In the hall, the grandfather clock measured the quiet. Its note was tender, almost human. Some houses learn to speak that way, Miss Marple thought. Greenways had been practicing for years. She looked toward the mantel mirror. Flame danced in the glass, breaking, joining, breaking again. Faces moved there without their armor. Grief loosened its grip. What remained was ordinary goodness. "Enough to go on," Celia whispered. "Do you think Ellen knew she was loved?" Miss Marple considered the steam. It rose, vanished, returned, like breath after weeping. "She knew she mattered," she said. "Sometimes that is the thread that holds the world." Rain ticked delicately along the sill. Somewhere a door settled, wood speaking to wood. The house exhaled. Something unspoken lingered, but softer now. It hurt less to touch. Mary reached for the letter, then didn't. Her hand hovered above its fold, like a sparrow deciding. She drew back and lifted her cup instead. Tea steadies the hand, Miss Marple thought. So does truth, given time. Leo rose and stoked the fire once. Sparks leapt, brief and bright, then fell into calm. He looked to Miss Marple with a son's tired gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. She inclined her head. "Be gentle with each other," she murmured. "Gentleness is the last craft we learn." They drank in companionable silence. Outside, The garden paths gathered silver puddles. A robin tested the wet hedge and shook itself clean. Evening blurred the borders between things. Hurt and hope sat nearer than before. Miss Marple set her cup down and folded her shawl. Age made careful gestures. Care made them kind. She studied the key and letter side by side. Locks and words. What we open. What we keep. She spoke at last, voice barely above the fire. "People are not puzzles," she said. "They are rooms. Doors left ajar for years. Windows painted shut by duty. Attics where laughter hides. Cellars where shame is stored in jars." Mary's eyes lifted, shining and grateful. Celia listened with her whole face. Leo breathed, as if remembering a forgotten rhythm. Raymond watched the flames find their quiet. Miss Marple's gaze softened further. "Sometimes a life is mended by small hinges," she added. "A word, a hand, a cup of tea placed within reach. Nothing grand, only precise." She reached again for the cup. Tea steam curled, then vanished into the lamp's halo. The amber light steadied. The room agreed to be simple. No drama was needed. Just breath, just time. The rain gathered strength, then softened again. Footsteps passed somewhere, measured and domestic. Greenways remembered how to be a house. They, how to be themselves. Miss Marple rose. Her knees protested, polite as old friends. She thanked Mary for the tea. She thanked Leo for the fire. Then she looked once at the window and once at the mirror. Both offered back a gentler world. Her thoughts arranged themselves with quiet care. In every heart, she mused, there's a locked door. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us tonight in our quiet corner of mystery and memory. Another candle has burned low, another truth set gently free. We hope the echoes of Greenways linger softly with you, not as sorrow but as understanding. Tell me, which clue whispered it first to you? Was it the missing key, the letter in the drawer, or the silence between words, the one that said everything? Miss Marple would say, it's never the clue that matters, but the heart behind it. And perhaps she's right. Sometimes we solve a mystery only to find ourselves in it. If you enjoyed tonight's story, tap that little bell so the next mystery finds you first. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love reading how you unravel each thread. Until we meet again, keep your tea warm, your heart observant, and your curiosity ever so kind. Because somewhere in another quiet village, another kettle is just beginning to boil. The fire fades, the rain slows, and Greenways drifts quietly into memory. But mysteries, they never truly end, do they? They simply change their name. Somewhere beyond this night, a new story begins to stir. A clock ticks in another village. A postman pauses at a gate, and on his bicycle, a single envelope trembles in the wind, its ink smudged by the morning rain. Inside, a name is written. No one knows by whom, no one dares to open it. A kettle begins to whistle in a nearby cottage. A curtain stirs. Someone looks out and sees what they shouldn't have seen. And there, waiting in the hush before dawn, a mystery prepares its breath, ready to whisper again. Stay close, dear friends. The next story is already knocking. You'll hear it soon in the sound of the bell, the fall of the rain, the turn of a key, and somewhere, another letter waits, unopened, under the morning rain.